morning. I had to wish the deacon good luck as he was going to take the gospel reading. It's such a long gospel. After I read this gospel yesterday, during the evening mass yesterday, I felt like drinking some water. It's so long. Well, thank you for the good job. I have to say this, my dear friends, that whenever I come across the particular reading where David was called and the way he was chosen by God through the prophets in Samuel, what actually comes to my mind is the way I answer the call of God myself. Because David was considered the least of the sons of Jesse. He was the least of the sons of Jesse, and he was even considered the least qualified to be king, to be the king of Israel. But he was the one chosen by God, and that reminds me of how I was, and even the way I saw myself, growing up as a child. I used to have this sense of, maybe I'll call it shame because of my speech defect, not being able to talk before people. In fact, my parents became so worried about me that that they even had to begin to pray for me that I may be able to talk, because I was always afraid of people. And I would rather prefer to take the back seat and to remain quiet. And this even happened while I was in seminary. And here was this guy who wants to be a priest, yet he doesn't have the courage to talk before the people. And guess what? Then in the seminary, whenever they would give me an assignment to do, I would prefer to delegate the assignment. Why? Because I did everything possible not to actually come to the public forum to make a speech, since I was so skeptical of how I would appear before the people. And today I am here talking. And you wouldn't believe this. If you had known me 15, 16 years ago, you wouldn't believe that I'll be able to stand before a congregation to make a speech. And I believe that if my friends then, or those who had known me then, if they come today to see me talking before you, they will definitely ask the question, is this Father Ambrose? Is this the Ambrose we used to know? What has happened to him? But that is the grace of God. That is how God transforms us. That is the grace of this vocation. And so when we say yes to God, God qualifies us. God qualifies us, and He gives us the grace we need to be the persons He wants us to be. So today we have this beautiful gospel that reveals so much about our salvation history. This gospel is indeed a summary of our salvation history, beginning from creation to redemption. In fact, it explains in details our spiritual journey. And our spiritual journey is always that journey from darkness to light. It is the journey from sin to grace. It is the journey, from being timid to being bold and being courageous for God. And we see this spiritual journey in the life of the man born blind, and who gained his sight by what Christ did. So this man was born blind, And he was born blind, not because he committed any sin, not because his parents committed any sin. He was born blind that the works of God may be revealed. And that is so instructive, that he was born blind that the works of God may be revealed, that the works of God may come to light. And this explains the fact that God could even allow us to go through some hurdles. He could allow us to go through some challenges. He could allow us to go through temptations. But just that he may be glorified, just for his works to come to light, for him to prove himself to be God, so that from this darkness the light shines, the light that darkness cannot overcome. This man was born blind. In his blindness, he lived in darkness. Now we go back to what happened at the beginning of creation. Genesis tells us that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that the earth was like a formless wasteland, and that darkness covered the abyss. Darkness. And what did God say? Let there be light. And there was light. So the light of God shone forth from a darkened world. And God began his creation. And so what we see in this blind man could remind us of how creation was when God began to put order in disorder, when God caused lights to shine forth from darkness. And now what did Jesus do to heal this man who was born blind? He had to spit on the ground, and he used a mixture of his saliva and clay to smear on the eyes of this man who was born blind. And by this very act, what happened? He told him, go and bathe in the pool of Siloam. Now we have to go back to Genesis, because it was the ancient tradition of the Jewish people that when God created Adam, that God used a mixture of saliva and clay. So when Jesus mixed saliva and clay, he was indeed going back to that creative act of God. And we could see him at this moment forming a new person in this blind man. A new creature is being formed by the very act of creation. Jesus Christ mixing saliva and clay to smear on the eyes of this blind man. And after he had done that, he told him to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And that reminds us of the pool of our baptism, because that is where we are regenerated. That is exactly where we are transformed, in the very pool of Siloam, the pool of our baptism. That is where we are transferred from darkness to light. We are transferred from sin to grace. That was what happened to this man born blind. When he washed himself in the pool of Siloam, he got his sight. He gained his sight. He began to see. We all began to see, my dear friends, the very day we were baptized. Because that was the day Jesus Christ, God transferred us from the dominion of darkness into his wonderful light, that we may now sing the praises of God who has redeemed us and who has saved us. It is so important, my dear friends, that our spiritual sight was given to us on the day we were baptized. Our spiritual vision was given to us on the day we were baptized, because the heavens opened and God spoke the way he spoke unto his son. This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. That is always the voice of the Father that speaks over the baptized child. This is my child in whom I am well pleased. It is so beautiful, my dear friends, that when he had received his sight, now he is transformed. Now he is a new person. Now what happened? His neighbors couldn't recognize him anymore. And they began to ask the question, could this be the man who was born blind? Or is this someone else? And some of them would say, I think he is the one. Some others would say, no, he's not the one, but he looks like him. Now you could see the confusion, that they couldn't recognize this man because he is now completely transformed. Do you know, my dear friends, that is exactly what happens to us when we are transformed by God. When we are completely changed by God's grace. Our neighbors, people may not even recognize us anymore because you are now a completely new person. And exactly what happened to me, my dear friends. Just imagine my old friends, those who had known me from my early childhood days, when they come to this church and see me talking in this way, they will also ask about the questions the neighbors had asked in the gospel. Could this be Father Ambrose? Could this be this boy we used to know? This boy who couldn't even speak before the people. This boy who couldn't even make a complete sentence before the people. This boy who had no courage to stand before the crowd. Could this be Ambrose? These are the questions they will ask. Because now you're a completely new person. God has transformed you. Anyone in Christ is a new creature. All things are passed away and everything is new. So they couldn't recognize this new transformed person that they could see before them, and they were all confused. But in their confusion, as they kept asking, talking, could this be? He looks like him. What did the man say? He was able to affirm his new identity. What did he say? I am. I am. Who identified himself as I am? God. God revealed himself in the burning bush as I am. And Jesus in the Gospels will also reveal himself as I am. I am the good shepherd. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the way, the truth, and the life. So when this man revealed his new identity as I am, he was indeed saying that he is now the symbol of God's presence. He is now the revelation of God's mercy. That was exactly what he was saying. I am. I am who God has made me to be. And he was so bold and courageous. This was a man who was born blind. And you could imagine the shame that accompanied blindness. You could imagine the embarrassment that accompanied blindness. But now he can see. Now he is courageous. I am. This is instructive, my dear friends, because it speaks so much about who we are today, that we should not be ashamed of who we have become. I should not be ashamed of my faith. I should not be ashamed of my new identity. We should not be ashamed to identify with God, especially in such a secularized world where there is every attempt to sweep God under the carpet. We should not be ashamed to identify with who God is and who God has made us to be. Like this man, we should be bold and courageous to identify with this new to identify with who God has made us to be. We are the children of God. We are the sons and daughters of God. We are the children of light. We do not belong to darkness. We belong to light. But what happened, my dear friends? The Pharisees now came on board, and they did everything possible to discredit what has just happened. They did everything possible to twist the narrative and to abuse the mind of this man against Jesus Christ. They even went as far as trying to manipulate his parents to force him into discrediting what has just happened. But what happened, my dear friends? This man wouldn't take that for an answer. He stood his grounds and he declared, I have been healed by a prophet. I was blind, but now I can see. The moment we have this personal encounter with Jesus Christ, no one else, my dear friends, can abuse our minds about God. That is where we ought to be. And that is why we always encourage that whenever we come to church, not just to look at the priest, not just to have relationship with ourselves. We come to church, my dear friends, that we may encounter God. That should be our primary reason why we come to church. Because the moment you have a personal relationship with Jesus, the moment you have your personal encounter with Christ, you wouldn't need anybody to tell you, my dear friends, who God is or who God is not. Because now you are convinced of the person of Jesus Christ. You can say like this man, he is a prophet. I was blind, but now I can see. That is where Catholics ought to be. We ought to be at that point where we are convinced about the faith we have, where we are convinced about the God we serve, where we are convinced about the Eucharist we receive. We don't need the social media to tell us about who God is or who God is not, because you have your personal experience, and that is what you are holding on to. And I tell you this, my dear friends, even as a Catholic priest, what sustains me goes beyond theology. What sustains me, it goes beyond philosophy. What sustains me is the faith, the personal faith I have in God. It is coming from my personal encounter with Jesus Christ. That is what keeps me going as a priest. Because there are so many things to discourage us. You have the scandals, you have the crises, you have the abuses. But despite all of these confusions, we are able to hold on to our faith because we have encountered Jesus. I was blind, but now I can see. I have my personal story to say about who Jesus Christ is and what he has done for me. But the Pharisees didn't end there. They went further and they began to argue with this man about who Jesus Christ is. And they told him, he is a sinner. He is not from God. What did this man do? This man now is an apostle of Jesus Christ, because when Christ told him to go to the pool of Siloam and wash, the pool of Siloam means sent. So this man was actually sent. After he had been transformed, he was now sent by Jesus Christ to be an apostle, to be a missionary. Right now we could see that he is no longer afraid. He is now up, to the game of the Pharisees. He is now matching them word for word, theology for theology, argument for argument. He began to debate with them about the identity of Jesus Christ. All I know that he is a prophet, and I was blind, but now I can see. He reminds me, my dear friends, of what the Bible says in Ecclesiastes. There is time for everything. There is a time to sow, and there is a time to reap. There is a time to live. There is a time to die. There is a time to be quiet. There is a time to speak out. It was time for this man to speak out. And he had to speak out in defense of what he had experienced. He had to speak out in defense of his faith, in defense of this new life he has received from Jesus Christ. And I tell him, my dear friends, it is time for us to speak out. It is time for us to speak out, to speak truth to power. It is time for us to speak out, to speak out in defense of our faith. It is time for us to speak out in defense of God, in defense of life, in defense of the truth. It is time for us to speak out like this man. He spoke out. It was time for him, and he did exactly the mission entrusted unto him. We, my dear friends, live in such a time where we just cannot afford to be quiet. And we cannot afford to be silent. And we cannot afford to be indifferent. Because the one who has truly encountered God does not keep quiet and is not indifferent, will not take the back seat. The one who has truly encountered God will always rise up to the occasion to speak truth to power, to speak in defense of the poor, in defense of those who are oppressed, in defense of those who are persecuted, in defense of those who are marginalized. That is the new life that God has called us to live. And at the end of this gospel, look at the beauty of this gospel. At the end of this gospel, we could ask ourselves the question, who were those that were really blind? Who were those that were really blind? Now you can see that the one who was blind could not see. And what happened? Because he could not see, he worshipped. He worshipped. But the Pharisees who claimed to have their sight, they were the ones who were truly blind. Because the real blindness goes beyond physical blindness. The real blindness is the spiritual blindness. It is our inability to see God. Our inability to see God, my dear friends, is the real blindness. And that is why St. Paul says, awake, O sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will give you light.